Well, hey guys, if we haven't got the chance to meet yet, my name is Zach. I'm the youth pastor here, and I am not up here to preach. And I'm really, really excited to introduce you to the people that are. We're doing something we've never done before. I'm choosing to believe that you weren't cheering just because I'm not preaching. You're more excited because you get to. We've got a team of some really young guys and girls or just one girl, that we believe in, that are called to pastor or minister or lead a youth group just like this one day. We believe in the next generation. So we've got Eddie coming up. We've got Josh, Aubrey, Julian, and Caleb. And all of these guys are interns. Yeah, give it up for them. All of these guys are currently a part of our internship program here at Westside, or they were. And we are so, so proud of them. They've been putting together a message for several weeks, getting ready to share with you, tag team style, a great message, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. So give them your attention, give them your energy, and give it up for Eddie here to start us off.
What's up, guys? Okay, so we're calling this the 5x5, and every time that Zach or Clint has said that so far, all I've thought about is, oh man, they're going to take us to In-N-Out and get us cheeseburgers. That's going to be great. But Zach did not buy us any cheeseburgers. I know, I'm as disappointed as you are. I really wanted a cheeseburger. But anyway, this is the 5x5, and we're all so excited to share with you guys. We've been working really hard for the last 20 minutes or so. No, oh, don't tell them that. No, we've been working really hard for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and we're just really excited to share with you guys what God has burdened on our hearts and what we think he wants to share with you tonight. So before we kind of get to the passage of Scripture that we're looking at, I just, I'm here to introduce it, talk about the topic, tell you guys who we're talking about, and then Julian's going to come up after me, and that's when we're going to dive into Scripture. So if you don't know, or if this is your first time here, we just finished a series called Builders, which Zach preached, and Builders was awesome because we got to see Nehemiah doing all these cool things for God. We got to watch as he rebuilt the walls of the city and built up just amazing things for the kingdom. And what we kind of want to talk about tonight is, how did Nehemiah get to that place? And not specifically Nehemiah, but how does a person get to have that authority? How do they have that power? Why do they have that power? What does it look like to be so full of the Spirit that you get to do just crazy big works, right? And so just by show of hands now, and of course we get to do this because we're the intern team, and it's not an intern sermon unless we make fun of our youth pastor a little bit. So by show of hands, who thinks the 5 of us can do better than Zach does on a weekly basis? That's a lot of hands. Zach, are you a little scared for your job now? Not at all? Maybe someday. Yeah, so Zach did an awesome job talking about Nehemiah and talking about the big works that he was able to accomplish. And we're going to talk about how he got to that point. And we're going to look at someone else's story, someone else who just did huge things for the kingdom. We're going to be talking about James tonight. You don't have to flip there yet. You don't have to cheer yet. That's coming later, trust me. But we're going to be looking at James. If you don't know, James was one of Jesus' brothers. And in the New Testament, in the Scriptures, in the Gospel, it said that the brothers of Jesus didn't believe that he was the Messiah. They didn't even believe in him. They grew up with him. They saw him every day. They probably got to see and hear things that we never got to see and hear. And so that's, James is with Jesus 24/7, right? And he didn't believe. It's also said that he becomes one of the early church's most prominent leaders, right? So that's where we pick up in the book of James. And so at some point, after Jesus was crucified and after he resurrected, something clicked for James. Something clicked, right? And I really think, another show of hands questions. How many of you guys have brothers specifically? Cool. Okay, so I have 2 brothers. They're both older than me. And I'm not going to try and say that puts me in the same place as James. That might be a little heretical, a little blasphemous, because my brothers are just not Jesus. But when my brothers would say things to me, when they would do things, when they would talk to our parents, talk to me, if I didn't trust what they were saying, then I was 100% against them. And that's kind of what Jesus did in the New Testament. If he wasn't 100% on board with Jesus claiming to be the Messiah, well, what's the other alternative? Not believe in him at all. So, and this is not the best story and analogy for this, but my brother John played football well before I started playing football. And he would tell me all the time, you have to work hard, you have to work harder, you have to do this, you have to do that. And the only reason I trusted him to tell me those things, the only reason I believed him and did those things was because then I saw him do the exact thing he was talking about. He would say, Eddie, if you want to be a football starter, then you have to push a car down the block for a mile. And I'm in kindergarten saying, that's not happening. But then I would watch John go out and push a car for about a half mile at least once a week. And it was awesome. And I was like, you know what? If he can do big things, I believe him, and I'm going to trust him, and I'm going to do big things too. So when we get to that point, that's when we start to see kind of what James did too, is at first he doesn't believe him. He's like, you're not the Messiah. You're not doing these. And he gets to see them every single day. And finally, Jesus comes back from the dead. He's resurrected. And James believes. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So really where we're heading with this is nearness in your relationship, trust in your relationship, proximity in your relationship with God is going to lead to just huge works for the kingdom. I'm going to say that again because it's really important for tonight. Proximity or nearness in your relationship with God leads you to do big things, to do bold things, and to serve in big ways for him. And we're going to be looking at that through the story of James, specifically after he's become one of these church leaders. And again, we're just so excited to get to share this with you. It's such an awesome story. It's such an awesome message. So that being said, Julian is going to come up, and he's going to start in James.
Hey. Let's give a quick hand to Eddie, guys. Wasn't that an awesome intro? All right, so I don't know whether this is your first time here or whether or not this is your 1,000th time here. I'm going to welcome my buddy Jefferson up here because I want to tell you guys before we flip to our Bibles and look at the message that we're going to be looking at. Guys, when we open the Word of God and we study and we talk and we learn from Him, we get pumped, okay? So when I say where we're going, what are we going to do, Jefferson? Applause. Just like that. Just like that. All right, stick with me. I want you guys to flip to James 2. Thank you, Jefferson. Thank you. All right, guys, so we're looking in the book of James 2, and we're going to be starting in verse 14. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about James. Not the same thing that Eddie said, but I really, really like and admire James, at least in the Bible, because he's a very logical, a very practical person. It seems like all the things he says to the people of the church or the people that he's preaching to or something, seems like things that I've grown up hearing, like I've heard from my teachers, my parents, mentors, from Zach or Clint or anybody like that. So it's interesting how things that happened like thousands and thousands of years ago, it's like, oh, I've heard this before. That's interesting. Wow, he was really ahead of the game back then. So the main premise of what we're going to be studying tonight is actions speak louder than words. So as you can see in Eddie's story with his brother pushing the car and everything, his words meant something, yeah, but then what he saw afterwards made that much more of a difference. So he was living just like he was preaching. So when we look at the book of James right here, we're going to start in verse 14. We start out with, What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? In other words, if you tell me that this is good for me, if you tell me this is bad for me, if you tell me this is the right way, this is the wrong way, but then I don't see you living like that, how is that going to be convincing at all? Like, there's no effectiveness in that. If I say, guys, smoking is bad for you, but then I'm walking around smoking, that doesn't make sense. That literally makes no sense at all, and that's exactly what James is addressing right here. He has a really, really cool quote somewhere later in the book, and it says, a tree will bear the fruits of which it belongs to. So at least in Eddie's scenario, his brother was, let's say his brother was a tree. I mean, obviously it wasn't a tree, but let's say I'm Eddie's brother and I'm a tree, right? I'm a tree. And what I belong to is I belong to football. That's what I do with my time. So the fruits I'm going to bear from doing football is going to be, good health and big muscles, and I'm going to be awesome on the field. I'm going to start and do this and do that and go pro. And then at the same time, let's say I'm a tree again, and I do something bad, like I drink all the time or I smoke or something. What am I going to bear from that? I'm going to, bear unhealthiness, like disease, I don't know, cancer, stuff like that. So yeah, what you do with your time and what you commit yourself to, those are the exact same things you're going to reap from it. If you do good things, you do good works, and you preach, yeah, I have a good faith. If you're not doing good works, then all you're going to do is reap what isn't good, and that means it's going to be bad. So looking back in the book, James gives us a little bit of an illustration. He says, if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So what he's basically saying, let's say, scenario right here, let's say Josh is sick, and I have the medicine he needs, or I'm capable of getting that medicine for him. He comes into work, I can see he's sick, and I'm like, oh, you poor thing, bless your heart, I hope you feel better. But then I have the medicine just stashed in my pocket, and I go about my day. How does that show that I really love and care for one of my closest friends? And I care about your health and this and that, but I am capable to save you, and I'm not going to. It's kind of the same thing. If your friend was starving on the side of the street or didn't have a jacket or something and you had a jacket, wouldn't you want to give that to him? That shows the love and care and the actual, like, oh, yeah, your words actually have meaning because your actions they correlate directly to your words. So he wraps it up in verse 17. He says, so also faith by itself, if it does not have works, it's dead. Your words, your faith, whatever you claim to be a part of, whatever you claim to hold in here, if you're living the complete opposite, then nothing of what you're saying and nothing of what you're doing has true value. So stay with me here. We're going to verse 18. And he says, but someone will say, you have faith and I have works. So that's basically saying, well, some people have their faith and some people have their works. But the thing is, if you have faith without works, then how can you really prove that your faith is genuine? You're sitting there and claiming to be this and that, but then you're not living it, so obviously we can't see it. But at the same time, if you're doing good things, you're saying like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, and I'm trying to be such a nice person, but then there's nothing guiding you through that, then all you're doing is going through the motions. You're moving aimlessly, kind of like a robot or something, and nothing of what you're doing has true meaning because you're just doing something out of obligation. So that's why it's so important to have the faith coincide with the actual things that you're doing. I have the faith. I believe I'm a Christian. I know I'm a Christian, and that way I'm going to live my life to the best of my ability as Christ would. And so he wraps it up in verse 18, and he says, show me your faith apart from your works, but I will show you my faith by my works. I don't need to sit there and claim to be this, claim to be that. You can see what I'm doing. You can see, oh, I attend church, and I help these people, and I serve here, and I volunteer here. Then he keeps going, and he says in verse 19, you believe that God is one, and you do well, but even the demons believe, and they shudder. In other words, what he's saying is, yeah, so, okay, you may acknowledge God if you don't have works. You can acknowledge God, but that's the same thing a demon could do. And obviously you guys aren't demons, right? I mean, you guys are people, but then there are many people out there that claim to be this, claim to be that. Okay, the demons can do that too. But what sets you apart is that you're able to work and fulfill the will of the Lord. You're able to actually hold true to what comes out of here, put it right here, and then do the Lord's work. That's the difference between us. Because devils, they do the work for the devil, and that's no bueno. And then verse 20 right here, we're wrapping it up. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? So James, what he addresses here, and what he basically addresses all throughout the whole entire book is, it doesn't make sense to call yourself this or that, or, he at least is telling the people that he's preaching to. He's like, if you guys claim to be Christian, if you guys are really trying to adopt that Christian identity, but then there's no true change in your actions and your thinking and like the way you hold and carry yourself, then all you're doing is going through the motions. You're sitting here and saying, oh, I want to be a part of this, and then you're not doing anything to actually show that you want to be a part of it or that you are. You're just claiming to be this and then acting another way, and then it doesn't bode well. So now we're going to bring up Josh Hartman, and he's going to show us the glue.
All right, guys, let's give it up for Julian one more time. All All right, guys, I just want to jump right back into verse 21. If we just take a look. Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? Verse 22 says, you see that faith was active along with these works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham, who believed in God and was counted him as righteous, and he was called a friend of God. Guys, so what we're seeing is Abraham is called a friend of God. How cool would that be if you walk into the lunchroom on the first day of school? By the way, how many of you guys this school year was your first year at that school? By show of hands, who was it? All right. Imagine walking into that lunchroom on the first day of school and God's just right there with some pretty cool sunglasses on right behind you. I'm with him. I'm walking around. He's my guy. We're best friends. That's how we do. Guys, so you might be wondering, like, how come Abraham has that relationship with God? How come I can't have that same thing? You guys, in Genesis 22, it says Abraham was 100 years old before he had Isaac. If anyone's 100 in this room, please come talk to me. I'd love to hear your secrets. God called to sacrifice his son Isaac, and who he had waited 100 years for. And he said, sacrifice him to me at the altar. And it was through a show of faith that Abraham followed through, knife in hand at the altar, prepared to sacrifice his son. And God stopped him. And it was through that show of faith that Abraham was made righteous and considered a friend through his works and his faith with taking Isaac to the altar. Abraham's obedience to God's commands was a great work of faith, and it's full-grown and genuine faith that great works can form. And you guys, I want to go back and let's take a look at verses 25 and 26. And it says, and in the same way was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. Now, Rahab, just a quick story about her. She was like it said, a prostitute, a sinner, the low of the low. And she had brought in and sheltered these two Israelite spies. And it was through her faith that they were doing God's work and that they were through God's will that she kept faith and then she helped them. And they later, through that show of faith, her and her family were both saved when the Israelites took over Jerusalem. And guys, we're talking about faith here. Verse 26, it says, for the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. What happens when someone dies? Their spirit, their soul leaves. It's just that body there. So when James is comparing that to someone's faith without works, just take a step back and look how that means for us. James is saying that if we're not pursuing our faith, working through our faith boldly, we're just there. We're just here on a Wednesday night so we can check the box that we came and I'm a Christian because I showed up to church. We're just a body sitting in the chairs. Guys, when we're not totally sold out for God, we see areas of our faith lacking, whether that's prayer, like with what Zach said a couple weeks ago, or with your works, with action through your faith, or something else. With Abraham earlier and Rahab in verse 25, they were faithful to God. They were willing to sacrifice their son. They were willing to sacrifice their own safety and their family's safety to put their faith in God. And it is through this relentless pursuit of God and the faith to follow and know that he knows what's best that we see in James 4 that leads to the closeness and the proximity to God, which is that friendship that Abraham had. And guys, now we're going to go ahead and welcome up Caleb as he delivers the next part.
And let's give it up for Josh for that wonderful piece. So he talked about Rahab and Abraham and how God used them and their faith to move in ways that we could barely even imagine. And James chapter 4 actually tells us how we can have that closeness with God and how we can live our lives for him and through him. So in verse 7, it says, "Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify you hearts, you double-minded." The word submit that he uses in verse 7 means to accept or yield to the authority or will of another person. So by submitting to God, we are turning to him and saying, your will is better than mine. Your authority, you know better than I know. So therefore, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do what you say and follow your will. Abraham, when his name was Abram, before he was living a life of faith and God changed his name to Abraham, he lived in a city called Ur. He and his family grew up there. That's all he ever knew. God one day came to him and said, look, Abram, you're going to move. You're going to leave. My will for you is to leave. Didn't tell him where, didn't tell him when, didn't tell him how long he was going to be gone. Just said, go. And Abram said, okay, left his family, left everything that he ever knew, and left. Just went. Trusted God that God knew what he was doing. Later, we see that Abraham becomes the father of many nations, the father of Israel, the father of Christianity. And had he not gone, we wouldn't be here today. God would have had to use somebody else to fulfill his plan. But Abraham trusted God's will and did what God said for him to do. One thing that Abraham shows to us is that we cannot know the will of God unless we are living in a life of pursuit and submission to him first. If we say, okay, God, I'll do what you want, but tell me what it is first, then that's not really faith, that's conditional. We can't live a conditional life and then say, yeah, I live for God. Yeah, I have good faith. We have to trust that he's going to do what he does, that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And in that word, submit, he means it as subjects to a king in a line of duty. He means it as a friend to one another in love and sacrifice. He means it as submitting our will to the will of God, saying, your will is higher than mine. He says we have to submit our understandings of life to the truth of the Father. Our understandings aren't true. God's understanding of life, God's knowledge of everything that he's got going on is truth. If we can put faith in that truth, if we can submit to that truth, then he will use us. We're called to be submissive to God not only out of fear, but out of love. We know that God isn't going to lead us with a heavy hand, but he's going to lead us with the love of a father. If we continue reading verses 9 and 10, be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves, therefore, before the Lord, and he will exalt you. When he says to draw near to him, that's not that he's drifted away. That's not that he's gone. It's turn around and see how close he is. The closer you draw to God, the more you're going to see him moving in your life in ways that you never would have seen if you were drifting away from him. If you turn around and say, God, I want to draw near to you. I'm going to grow close to you. And you put in the work, you will see what he has set before you. James's message from verse 7 is to submit to God. And then verses 8 through 10, he kind of gives us 4 points on how to do that. So if you're taking notes, this is a good thing to write down. The first of which is that which is distant from God must be brought to God's feet. That which is distant from God must be brought to his feet. If you've left God, if you've turned away, if you've said, nope, I'm not doing this, the first step is to come back to him, fall on your face before him and say, God, I've messed up. I need you, and I can't do this without you, so please take me back. The second point, in verse 8, he says to cleanse your hands and purify your hearts. This is extremely important to realize that this is the second of the points. You don't have to go to him and cleanse your hands and purify your hearts and then say, okay, God, here I am. There's nothing we can do to be good enough to then go to God. You can't get your life together. You can't say, all right, I'm finally there. God, now you can use me. You have to come to him dirty and broken. And then once you've said, okay, God, use me, then you go in and you say, okay, I have this sin in my life. I need to get rid of it. I need to turn from it. I need to get away from this. The third point is to mourn and weep our own and other sins. Our sins, we have to be ready to get rid of them. We have to be ready to push them away. And we have to mourn and weep out of shame for those sins, but the knowledge that Jesus Christ has saved us and that he has taken that away from us, and there's nothing else that we can do. And we mourn and weep for our friends' sins because we want them to see the true love of Jesus. If they are living a life of sin and they're not repentant, it should break our hearts to the point where we can't do anything but weep and pray for them. The final point is verse 10. He says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. We have to be humble. We have to put our pride to the side and say, God, use me. I don't know how you're going to use me. I don't know why you're going to use me, but I know that you will. You have to be set in your ways so that you're not ready to take the credit for it. You know that all the credit goes to God. You have to humble yourself and set away from that. It says that he will exalt you, not necessarily in worldly terms. You're not necessarily going to be the captain of the team. You're not going to be the president of your school, president of your own country. That's not what it means by exalt you. He may lead you down that path and allow you to do that, but that's not what this is saying. This is saying that he will use you in ways that you couldn't even imagine. Abraham was used in ways that he could never have imagined. He didn't think he was going to have a kid. And then God was like, nope, you're 100 years old. You're still going to have a kid. I promised you, here's your kid. And then through that kid, he becomes the father of many nations. Rahab had no clue what was going on. She just saw that these two guys were hiding from the law, and she was like, look, I believe that what you're doing is right, and I'm going to bring you in. I'm going to hide you even if it costs me my life. And because she brought them in, and because she hid them, when they went and they attacked the city, she and her family were spared. This is what it means when God says that he will exalt you. And with that, we're going to welcome up Aubrey to close us out.
Yeah. All right, let's keep it going for Caleb. Come on, yeah, that was great. I think you can already see the difference in what I'm about to do and then what they did, because look at this table. Look, someone left a Bible, someone left their notes, someone left their notebook, and that's how my everyday life is. So, yes. All right, so thank you guys so much for having the grace to let us come up and mess up and be one of our first audiences that we ever get to talk to. Thank you so much. Give yourself a round of applause. It's great, it's great. If you see my hand shaking and my eyes darting across the back of the room, no, it's not you. It's me. It's me. It's totally me. I'm not worried about what you're going to do. I'm worried about what I am going to do, and that is what I'm always terrified of every single day of my life. All right, so real talk, guys. So some of you guys in the room are wondering if you've even ever experienced a work by faith. Some of you are wondering where your faith is despite all of the works that you do, and then there's some of you who have no idea what any of that means. Trust me, we've all been there at least one point or another. So to start off, for you to have faith is for you to do works. So if you're wanting to know what that means, or you're like, how in the world would I even have the desire to do works? That doesn't even make sense. You've got to realize that because you have your faith, it should inspire you to do good works. So James 2:18, if you want to read with that with me, it says, show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Faith apart from works is useless. So sometimes when I think about that, I tend to think of like when you see a mission trip. Like, our church sends out like a bunches of mission trips every single year. And so like, okay, they're going out there to spread the gospel. They're going out there to do some good works. Awesome, great. And then you see some organizations that aren't a part of a church. You see some things that aren't a part of like any type of organization that they'll go out and do stuff. And so it's kind of like, that's awesome, but what's behind it? It's like, what's motivating you? What do you use as your motivation? So sometimes that helps me to think of that. So you shouldn't have a forced feeling, though, to do these good works. So rather, the desire should push you. It should keep you going. It should keep that momentum going every single day of your life. Because you wake up in the morning and you remember that God's got you, you want to help other people feel like they're covered too. So that's always good to think about. All right, so for those of you who are seeking the desire, but you haven't found it yet, like I just kind of mentioned, like, because you are able to wake up every morning and you know when you wake up that it's like, I might mess up today. I might do terrible. I might get an F on that test. I might walk up to someone and totally lose it on them, which is totally fine. I've done that at least 90,000 times in my life. You've got to realize, you've got... Thanks for that. You've got God in your life, so he's going to cover you every step of the way. Doesn't mean he's giving you the okay stamp, like, okay, do it again, but it means that he's got you, and he's going to tell you, keep going, you're fine. It's going to be all right. So in a perfect world, we'd be doing good works all the time. When God created our world, he had intended that we'd all walk together and that God would walk in the Garden of Eden with us every step of the way, but this isn't a perfect world, so we're not going to be perfect. But despite us being sinners, God calls us to do good for those around us and do it for the glory of him. So keep doing good works for the Lord. There was times in my life where I felt like every day that I'd go to church, every time that I would be nice to someone, it felt like it was going unnoticed. Like I felt like, what am I doing this for? Like I need clarification. I need someone to tell me like I'm doing a good job. Like what's going on? And so it doesn't go unnoticed by God. And so every single day in your life where you feel like you might even be distant from God or something's going on and you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing this for anymore. Just remember, God's watching you every step of the way. Not in a creepy way, but he's watching you every step of the way. And he totally doesn't let it go unnoticed. He knows your life like the back of his hand. He loves you like no other. And he's always got you covered. So to move on, like for the reality that you've got to think about is that God is going to watch you. He's going to protect you. He's got your back every single day of your life. To know that you've got that kind of love, why would you not want someone else to have that love too? It's like keeping it balled up inside of you is not going to do anything good for someone else. Like Julian mentioned, if he knew Josh was sick and he had the medicine for it, why wouldn't he want to help? Jesus could have said the same thing. He saw us in our sin. He saw us struggling every day of our life. He could have just been like, God, no, I'm not going to do that. But he said, please, let me take this for them and let me put it on myself. I'll carry it so that they can have the best life ever with us. So just remember that, to keep others in mind whenever you're doing things day by day, because God has got you, and he's got you in every step of the way. It's going to be awkward, totally going to be awkward every time that you go up to someone and you're like, hey, let me help you, let me do this. And then you're like, yeah, in your mind, you've got to remember, though, it's like, it's for God, and that's the whole purpose of that. But then there's other people, like I mentioned before, that don't feel the need and would rather go day by day living their lives. They're like, okay, I'm saved by God, it's done. I'm good, it's over. So for those people, the reality is that God created you for a purpose. He didn't create us knowing that we're going to be perfect. He didn't create us knowing that things are going to be hunky-dory all the time. And yes, I just used Zach's word, hunky-dory, and that was a mistake. I think it's a Southern thing. I'm sorry. He created you for a purpose. He knew every hair on your head. He knew exactly what your move was going to be every day of your life. And he didn't create you just to sit and do nothing. He created you because he knew that you were going to be a follower of Jesus. And he created you because he knew your purpose in life. Because the reality is, did God send his son to die on the cross for our sins so we could sit every day of our lives and watch people that we don't know make the decision to go to hell? No, he didn't. Did Jesus become one of mankind for us to go through day-to-day life without even taking the time to check on those around us and take care of our friends and take care of our family? No, he didn't. So I want to encourage you to find that desire tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Clint to come up and play a song for us while we finish this out. But God calls us to be good for those around us. He wants to have you a part of his family. He wants us all to be in heaven with him one day. He wants us to live that life because he loves us. And so we need to have that love for others too, and we need to always keep in mind that, God didn't put us here just to be saved and leave. He put us here so we can be saved, then we can help others get saved too.